Hello everyone, just Goran here and welcome back to another Planet Zoo real life inspiration video. I realized the other day that I haven't done that many bird inspiration videos yet, so today we are looking at a whole bunch of red-crowned crane habitats. And the first zoo we're looking at today is Dierenpark Amersfoort, where we are in a beautiful Japanese garden, complete with bonsai trees, a little koi pond and some lovely architecture. And we're going through this nice little gate, which leads us right to the red-crowned crane habitat right over here. You can see it's not a complete aviary, but there is some netting above to prevent something. I'm not exactly sure what, but this is quite a lovely enclosure. It's not the biggest one, but it's got a nice little water in the front and then more of the garden theming in the back. And in the summer it looks beautifully lush with all the stuff around, so that's just really, really cool. And then we got another one of those gates as the exit of this little area, and that concludes Amersfoort. So next up we have Aquazoo Leeuwarden, and this is one of my favorites. It's pretty simple, but it's just so beautiful. I absolutely love all of the habitats in this video that just have a huge body of water and just this natural wetland environment. It's so cool to see the cranes walking around, wading in the water, chasing away some ducks apparently. Yeah, it's just really striking and beautiful in my opinion, and we'll get many more examples of this as well as we get through the other enclosures, so that's super exciting. But yeah, that was it for Aquazoo Leeuwarden. Let's move to the next zoo, which is Artis. And Artis is a pretty special enclosure as well. We start off with all these crane silhouettes that you can see, and the enclosure right in front of us, where you can also see a little baby over there, which is super cool. The parent was pretty protective of it. She came running right up as I approached the enclosure. But yeah, those silhouettes that we saw, what are those about? Well, we can see here on the sign, they are instructions on how to dance like a red-crowned crane. As you probably know, cranes do a little dance as courtship. So if you follow the instructions on these signs, maybe you can court one of the cranes in the enclosure. Probably not, but it's still a really cool little bit of education and some interactivity to have your guests do. So that's really quite cool. And then the enclosure itself, you probably already noticed there's this ruin inside of it. That is not some theming that the zoo added, that is actually a listed building. Artis is a very old zoo, so it has many listed buildings, and this is one of them, and the aviary was just built around that. And yeah, it definitely is a pretty cool backdrop for this enclosure. Something you'll also notice that this is a complete aviary, whereas a lot of the habitats in this video are actually open-topped, but here the cranes are mixed in with snowy owls, so that's probably the reason why, isn't it? Yeah, I think so. Next up we have Avifauna, and this is also one of my favorites, probably due to a biased reason. This is actually a mixed enclosure with the red-crowned crane and the red panda, which is of course my favorite animal. So yeah, little bit of a bias there, but it's still a really lovely enclosure. Again, large body of water and just a beautiful landscape. I think it's very picturesque. And I, of course, loving red pandas so much, actually snuck into this enclosure one day, and here you can see what it looks like from the other side. So you can see the cranes walking around over there. And no, I did not sneak into this enclosure, just in case. I booked a backstage tour, and one really interesting thing that I saw back here is actually these feeders for the red panda. They make sure that the red-crowned cranes cannot get to the pandas' food. So that's actually something to consider when you make any mixed habitat, is how do they make sure that the right animals get the right food and there's no thievery going on in there. But yeah, that's pretty much it for Avifauna. Just one more look at that nice enclosure from this side. And then we're going to move to the next zoo, which is the Tierpark of Berlin. And now I will say I did not necessarily see the red-crowned cranes here. I read that they should be somewhere in the pheasantry, but I visited the pheasantry like first thing in the morning, and most of the birds weren't outside yet, and I kind of went through it very fast. So I don't really know which birds are in which of these aviaries. I couldn't really find any information on it online either, so I don't know. I hope they be in a larger aviary than some of these, but yeah, just take it as inspiration with a grain of salt. But at the Zoo of Berlin, I did see the red-crowned crane enclosure. They're actually right at the entrance over here. If you look left as you're walking inside through the older entrance, you've got this black buck enclosure over here, and it's actually a shared enclosure with the red-crowned crane. But you can definitely tell that it's mainly made for the black buck. So that is that for Zoo Berlin. And then next up we have BestZoo, and this is actually a really lovely enclosure. This is my favorite enclosure in BestZoo. It doesn't say a lot, but yeah, weirdly enough, it's mixed with wallaby. But I just love the shape of this enclosure. It tingles something in my brain. It just works for me. I don't know how else to explain it. I just really like it. Just the way it slopes up and goes in, and all the bamboo around it. It just works. I love it, and it's cool. So good job, BestZoo. Good job, you did good. Next up, we are going to Van Blanckendaell Park, and this is a pretty interesting enclosure right over here. We have a massive aviary with all sorts of birds, including the red-crowned crane, as you can see over here. But I feel like this zoo wanted to have a bunch of birds, but they just wanted to make one aviary because, I don't know, reasons. Because this aviary has so many different birds in it, just from all over the world. There's no cohesion, nothing. There's no sense to be made of this. There's also a muntjac in there, which is actually pretty common mixed with the red-crowned crane, as we'll see. But yeah, just a huge aviary with birds from all over the world, including a red-crowned crane. So there you have it. That's Van Blanckendaell Park. Next up we have Blijdorp, Rotterdam Zoo, and we're entering the Asian swamp or the Asian marsh area. And what's really cool at the entrance over here are these fog machines, creating a nice swampy atmosphere, I suppose. But the first animal that you encounter in this area, or at least that you used to encounter in this area, I should mention they're not here anymore. I think the last one has moved out. So I don't know what the plan is with this area. But yeah, the first animal you would have encountered here was the red-crowned crane, and it's a lovely enclosure. You get really close up to them. They've got a super large body of water to wade around in. Usually you'll also find things like ducks and stuff in there. And it just ties the area nicely together. It's a nice opening and ending, because you also come by them again as you leave the area, as you can see. So I really hope that they will come back eventually, because it was really cool. Anyway, next up we have the Zoo of Cologne, and just like in the Zoo of Berlin, we just have a really nice big black buck enclosure, and there also happens to be some red-crowned crane in here, and the black buck were absolutely going apeshit. I don't know what was up with them, but yeah, that's pretty much it right there for Cologne. Next up we have Uilen and Dierenpark Paay. Kind of similar to BestZoo. This isn't a great zoo overall, but the red-crowned crane enclosure is actually quite nice. It's got that marshy, swampy-like environment that I really like, albeit not as eye-catching as some of the other ones in this video, but it's still quite nice. The only thing that I will critique is the viewing experience here. Because of all the overgrowth and the chain link, it's actually quite hard to get a good view of the animals in here, which doesn't seem completely necessary. I feel like you could design this in another way that it's more pleasant to look at. But yeah, overall not a bad enclosure at all, and really good for, especially for the Paay. Then next up we have Tierpark Dessau, where we actually have a red-crowned crane aviary over here, complete with a sign. Yeah, it's a nice aviary, a lovely little pond, nice lush foliage, but that's all the footage I have, so I gotta keep it short on this one. Next up we have Tierpark Hagenbeck, where the red-crowned crane are once again mixed with some muntjac. We got a nice enclosure for both of them with quite a bit of space on the grass and stuff. We also have the smallest red-crowned crane chick that I've ever seen. Look at how adorably cute that thing is. But yeah, that's pretty much it right here. Just a nice little pond for the cranes, some foliage around. It's a pretty decent enclosure. Then next up we have the Zoo of Krefeld. Here they keep the red-crowned crane inside of an aviary, and it's quite nice. A nice little lush bit of forest with a lake kind of pondy thing in the middle right there. Yeah, just a decent enclosure. Nothing too special here to mention either. So let's move on to Mondo Verde, where we have another Japanese garden. So this zoo is like 90% botanical garden, and then it's got some zoo enclosures throughout. So the garden part of this is actually really quite nice. Even though I visited in the winter, it still looked pretty impressive, and I can definitely imagine that in the summer this would look absolutely gorgeous. You've got all these little buildings, but then the enclosure for the red-crowned crane really wasn't all that much. I have to say, it was kind of an eyesore in what is otherwise a pretty beautiful garden. It didn't feel like there was much cohesion between the two, like where in Amersfoort you kind of had the same elements from the garden as backgrounds in the red-crowned crane enclosure, and here the enclosure is just kind of dumped next to the garden with all these fences around. It doesn't create a sense of cohesion. It kind of feels like an afterthought, and like not the same amount of care was put into the enclosure as the area surrounding it, but this is a bit of a shame. Next up we have Pairi Daiza, where we are walking through kind of a tunnel of beautiful decoration with views of several enclosures. And over here we've got a Peer David's deer enclosure, which also, according to the signs at least, has red-crowned crane in it. And then there's a second red-crowned crane enclosure right over here, which is shared with hog deer. And here I did see the red-crowned crane. I will say this footage is already quite dated. It's almost 2 years old at this point, and by now the red-crowned crane have actually gotten a new enclosure. I don't know if it's an additional enclosure or if they've actually moved out of this area, but Pairi Daiza has created a whole new Japanese area, so of course the red-crowned crane have gotten a spot in there. But yeah, here you can see the Peer David's deer enclosure, which should also have red-crowned crane in it, and here is the hog deer enclosure, again from another side. As a visitor, you're really just walking in between the middle of these two enclosures. So you look to the left, you see this enclosure, you look to the right, and you see the other one with the Peer David's deer, which actually managed to get pretty close up to over here. You can also see the little baby. And I forgot to mention, this enclosure actually also has muntjac inside of them. So a lovely little mix of all sorts of stuff right there. But that's it for Pairi Daiza. Let's move on to Pakawi Park, which is a very interesting enclosure. It actually took me a while to figure out where the red-crowned cranes are again. I thought they'd be in the wetland aviary, but no, they just are hanging out in this random enclosure together with a goat and a capybara. I forgot to include this in the capybara video, can you believe it? How could I have forgotten this beautiful mix? Very interesting. Anyway, next up is the Zoo of Rostock, where the red-crowned crane can be found over here in this little, what feels like a sectioned off bit of forest. You don't get very good views of them since the path is quite far away from this fence. I don't know, wasn't my favorite enclosure, I have to say. Moving along, we got this enclosure of the Zoo of Veldhoven, where we can also see a swan. I'm not sure if that's a wild swan or a zoo swan, but the enclosure is quite nice. We've got a large pond, a little land section in the middle. The only thing that caught my eye is that there's not a lot of shade. I don't know if red-crowned cranes need shade. I guess they do have a little house over there in the middle, so maybe it's fine. But yeah, next up we've got Vogelpark Niendorf in Germany, and this has to be one of my favorite enclosures in the video. We've got just this huge wetland area just in the middle of the zoo, not just for the red-crowned cranes but for several other species of crane as well, and they all have enclosures just like this one, just beautiful wetland landscapes that you're walking through as a visitor. And speaking of walking through, at the end of this area you actually enter a walk-through red-crowned crane enclosure, believe it or not. I was definitely not expecting that. I feel like some people would definitely not enjoy walking through a red-crowned crane enclosure because, I don't know, they can be quite scary. They're big birds, but I mean, just look at this beautiful, beautiful landscape. It's absolutely amazing, and it's so cool for the red-crowned crane as well. I really do feel like this is just the type of habitat that they would inhabit in the wild, and I'm so happy I visited this place. It was mainly just a coincidence because I had some time left on my way from Schwerin to Hamburg, and I found this along the way, and I decided to check it out, and I was not disappointed. Highly recommend Vogelpark Niendorf. I even had a chat with the owner when I was here, who was super excited to tell all about his birds and the zoo, and yeah, like genuinely highly recommend this place. It's great. But anyway, next up we have the Veldvogelpark Walsrode, where we also have a little bit of Japanese theming with this little hut over here, from which we can view the beautiful red-crowned crane enclosure in the back over there. It's such a wonderfully lush enclosure thanks to all the nettle that is growing in there, as well as the other plants in front over here in the little garden. And yeah, it's just a really beautiful enclosure. I love the big willow tree standing in the middle here, and yeah, it's all just really cool. I don't have much else to say. Next up, we've got the Grüne Zoo Wuppertal, and we are in kind of a forgotten, or what feels like a forgotten part of the zoo. It's just this lonely road kind of in the middle of the zoo, not really on the direct walking route, but you can find these lovely red-crowned crane enclosures over here. I love the way that they slope up. They're nicely lush. There's a bit of water in the front, and the barrier is very minimal, allowing you to get a great view of the cranes in here. So yeah, just a really nice enclosure. And then it's already time for the last zoo of the video. We are heading to Dierenpark Zie-Zoo, where we've got another little aviary for the red-crowned crane. They share this with some gulls and other birds, I think. And we've got some nice plants inside. It's pretty lush, but we don't have that big of a water feature. Just a little small concrete pond over there. Not exactly my favorite. But as we go to the other side, there is a very interesting part of this habitat, which is this kind of building in the middle of that. I'm not sure if it also doubles as indoor area for the cranes. I'm really not sure, because next to the window into that building on the inside is a completely different education sign for the northern giant cloud rat. I'm not sure exactly what the idea was here, because the viewing experience is awful. I'm not sure how you're ever supposed to see that animal. Like, why would you put a glass viewing area inside of an aviary? It's weird. It's weird, but that's what it is. That's Zie-Zoo's red-crowned crane enclosure. And those are all the red-crowned crane enclosures that I have seen. Hope you got some red-crowned crane inspiration, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye bye!